Welcome to my best decks roundup as we head on into the first weekend of the Gwenpool season. Airship has predictably fallen off in play rate a significant amount, but still remains the most popular deck by far. Gwenpool is not only a playable but seemingly powerful card with a number of shells that she's fitting well into. So today we're going to cover not only the deck list that I use personally to climb back to Infinite already, but also go over all of the deck lists that lots of people are finding success with on Untapped. Let's go ahead and dive on into it, shall we? We kick off my pocket picks this week with the Gwenpool deck that I used to clear the last of the 90s into Infinite with this season, featuring Hitmonkey. Hitmonkey and Gwenpool felt like a fun pairing because both of them work really well together with Mysterio. Mysterio counts as 3 cards played out in one turn when triggering Hitmonkey, and Gwenpool's bonuses apply not only to the real Mysterio but each of your clones as well. This means, for example, if you Gwenpool onto Mysterio twice, the main Mysterio will be 8 while each of the clones are 4. This deck list has a ton of ways to trigger Gwenpool not only once but twice, thanks to Absorbing Man and Grandmaster duplicating her trigger, and even going so far as to play Psylocke so we can Gwenpool on turn 3, beast her back to our hand on turn 4, and then play her out organically again on turn 5. The other bits of this deck play nicely into these synergies. Hood, Nico Minaru, and White Widow are all cheap cards that we can beast back and forth to our hand. Wasp and Makari help us control our hand size so that way when we play out Gwenpool, we're more likely to get her bonus onto key things. As far as must-have higher series cards go for this deck, in addition to Gwenpool, I think Hitmonkey is the only other absolutely must-have. Nico Minaru, White Widow, Grandmaster, and Makari can all be easily substituted out or switched around for other cheaper cards with honor reveals that we can play out early and also get value by bouncing with Beast. Things like Hawkeye, Iceman, and even America Chavez I think are excellent substitution candidates for any of these. My next Jeff's pick this week is a Gwenpool variation that goes all in on buffing cards in our hand and our deck. I honestly wasn't expecting a lot from this deck list when I first started playing it on stream, and it really impressed me. This deck list honestly might have some of the best cube equity of any deck I've ever played in Marvel Snap, meaning that the games that you win, you frequently win by a lot, and the games that you lose, you can easily bounce out of for minimal loss. The reason for this is quite straightforward. While your opponent gets to see all of your Okoye and Gwenpools and Nakias setting up, they don't get to know exactly how much or what they are setting up. In a reasonable hand with this deck, you can regularly put 40, 50, or even 60 points of power into play on the last turn through a combination of Sebastian Shaw, Mysterio, Wasp, and even cost reduction from things like Fastos. Your opponent will have no idea exactly what you're buffing and by how much until it's too late for them to be backing out. I'd also like to call out one card I'm not playing in this deck to head off some questions at the past, and that's Brood. Brood is a very board space hungry card that you're frequently not going to have space to make 2 broodlings with, and Mr. Sinister, in addition to only taking up 2 slots, is more energy efficient, which is really important on turn 6 because a play you're regularly going to make with this deck is Mr. Sinister into Absorbing Man, making 2 really large lanes. As far as higher series cards go in this deck, Sebastian Shaw is absolutely must have alongside Mr. Sinister and Mysterio. He's our 3rd card that's a huge payoff for pumping up our stuff. Similarly, Grandmaster is the other card that I would say is not optional. He allows us to duplicate Gwenpool's bonuses as well as Nakia to really push our pumping into overdrive. The other higher series cards, Nico Minaru, Fastos, and Makari, I think can be substituted out for other cheaper cards, ideally ones that buff our stuff, such as Forge and America Chavez that work well with our synergies. My last Jeff's pick this week is a Ronin Ravonna deck list that I had a really good run with on stream and felt like it had good tools to be competitive. Your basic game plan is relatively straightforward. You set up a Ronin on turn 5 as a stat stick in one of your paths, and then on the last turn of the game, we can copy Ronin with Mystique and then play out something like Master Mold or Maximus to inflate the opponent's hand. Ravonna Renslayer is key because she not only makes Mystique cheaper, but she can also make things like Sage and Iron Man cheaper to make our output on that 6th turn of the game be really varied and difficult to predict. Iron Man works well with Iron Lad as well, who kind of ties the room together, adding some nice consistency to what we have going on. You mix in a dash of disruption with things like Iceman, Baron Mordor, and Mobius M. Mobius, and this deck list felt like it had real tools to be competitive in the format. As far as must-have higher series cards go, I would go so far as to say Ravonna is the only one you absolutely have to have. Sage can be cleanly replaced with something like Wolfsbane that gets discounted by Ravonna and provides stats, and then Mobius and Iron Lad could be other utility cards like a Red Guardian or a Luke Cage or even something like a Jeff the Baby Landshark you can just play out proactively and move around the board where he needs to be. Moving into our high potential category, we have deck lists that have impressive stats so far at untap, and albeit smaller sample sizes, any of these decks could potentially be the next breakout thing if their performance keeps up as their sample size grows. We kick off the high potential category with a Gwenpool Sarah variation that's quite interesting. This archetype has always excelled at keeping its strength concealed in its hand until the last turn, when Sarah's cost reduction allows you to play out a bunch of stuff in a giant flurry. Gwenpool leans into this strength by leaving half of her 12 points of power inside of your hand for you to play out once you have more information about what your opponent is doing. Something that's especially interesting to me about this list is that it's explicitly not playing any cards that synergize with Gwenpool Extra. This is essentially showcasing the fact that Gwenpool is just kind of a generically good card so long as you can consistently play out whatever card she's buffing up, since she's providing 12 points worth of power for just 4 energy. As far as higher tier substitutions go, you can easily swap in things like Medusa, Lizard, or Polaris for things that are looking to provide stats, and you could substitute other good tech cards like Luke Cage and Mobius for answers that you may be missing. Our next high potential deck list is a super giant control list featuring Hydra Bob. I actually used this deck list to win an Infinite Conquest run last season with Lizard in the place of Bob, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that's the better card for that slot. If you haven't seen this deck list before, its game plan is really sweet. You play a bunch of low energy, high power cards to help you grab priority on the board, and then with the information that Daredevil and Supergiant provide, we can leverage effects like Teenage Warhead, Cosmo, and even Alioth to punish our opponent since we have priority. This deck list really feels like it has all the right tools for all the right places if you know exactly what to expect out of what your opponent's bringing to the table. As far as higher series cards go, I think Supergiant and Alioth are the two essential ones for this deck list to function. A lot of the other ones have good, clean substitutions. Red Guardian and Nocturne can be subbed out for other high-power 3-energy cards, such as Polaris or Gladiator. Makari, as odd as it sounds, can substitute for Squirrel Girl, which is a cheap card to help you grab priority by playing to every lane. And White Widow and Jeff can be replaced by a mixture of things like Lizard, Medusa, or Nightcrawler, who can also move around the board. Our next high potential deck list is an oldie but a goodie, a Mr. Negative Silver Surfer mashup. While Sage was a more recent tool that it gained in its arsenal, the core of this deck list has been running around Marvel Snap, putting up good results here and there for a while. I'm not surprised to see deck lists like this finding success in our current Airshim metagame, in large part due to the fact that even though these Airshim decks have access to some tech cards, they simply don't draw those tech cards consistently. This deck list, when snap and retreating well, also has really big swings that allow you to generate good cube equity, since playing around things like zero cost Iron Man, Mystique, and Sage can be quite difficult for your opponents to do. If you find yourself missing Sage, you can easily substitute her out for your favorite other 3-energy cards such as Bishop that also works cleanly with Mr. Negative. Our next high potential deck list is Black Swan Bounce. It always puts a smile on my face when one of my pocket picks from a previous week starts getting played enough to make it into the other categories in subsequent videos. This deck list is really good into the Airshim decks in my experience. Their interactive bits are things you can easily play around if you're manipulating priority appropriately with cards like Falcon and Beast. As far as higher series cards go in this deck list, I think Hitmonkey and Black Swan are definitely must-have for the core of how the deck works. Sasquatch is definitely not a card I would recommend anybody spend resources on if they don't already have her. She's easily substituted for something like Sage or even the Collector if you need a more budget choice. That just leaves Nico Minaru at the bottom end of our curve. You could substitute out for another 1-energy card like Iceman or even Hawkeye as a threat that can grow up in stat line. Moving along to our most popular decks per untapped metrics, Airshim is definitely still number one with a bullet. It's worth noting, though, that its play rate is down from the north of 75% that he was the few days following his release to now sub 40% and even sub 30% depending on which slice of data I look at on the untapped tracker. The most popular build of Airshim by a wide margin is still this incredibly inbred one, playing things like Darkhawk and Blob and even Mystique to double level up on these, but honestly, as I've played against this deck with lots of different decks over the course of the last week now, the power level of it just doesn't seem that overbearing to me. Even blobs are consistently close to 15 power since you have so many randomly generated small things, and investing 6 energy for a stat line of that payoff is quite easy for a lot of the decks in the format to overcome in my experience, whether it's interacting with it with a tech card directly or simply making your own bigger stat line. In my opinion, despite being incredibly popular, Airshim decks as a whole really feel like they're kind of underexplored in terms of archetype innovation. Looking at all of the metrics that we have available to us on Untapped, the deck lists are all very similar and don't seem to show many people experimenting with anything outside of shoving in more tech cards like Rogue to try and win a mirror match harder in a way that's incredibly cheesy, while also leaving themselves very exposed to opposing copies of Loki. After Airshim, the next most popular archetype per untapped metrics are lots of different variations of Silver Surfer featuring Gwenpool as our latest season pass card. It makes a lot of sense that she's ended up finding a strong home here. Both Brood and Sebastian Shaw are cards that allow you to take her +6 power and turn it into a whole lot more than that as you deploy it to the board. These deck lists also usually have a clean spot available on their curve on turn 4 to play her out when they would normally be leaving extra energy on the table by simply playing out a different 3 energy play. Unlike Airshim, there seems to be a lot of experimentation in Silver Surfer decks on Untapped right now with what 2s and 3s to play, seeing a lot of variety. If you're missing any of the higher series cards in these deck lists, you should definitely substitute them out for other things at a similar energy cost that provides you with good utility in your gameplay. As we move into the top performing deck list per metrics we have on Untapped so far to start the season, it is not a surprise that all 3 of the deck lists we're about to look at contain the card Darkhawk. Airshim is still very popular. That being said, something that's noteworthy about all these Darkhawk lists is they are not playing it as purely a tech card. They're all playing supporting casts such as Korg, Rockslide, and Black Widow as tools to make Darkhawk larger against opposing 12-card decks. As of my recording of this video, the top performing deck on Untapped is this Darkhawk Ravonna mashup featuring the Thena Angela Kitty Pride package along with Hope as an additional way to accelerate out extra energy. This deck list just has a bunch of efficient ways to put stats into play, from our small growing package to Darkhawk to Iron Man to Mystique to duplicate our ongoing effects and even Sage to slam down as a 2 energy double-digit point stick. The Darkhawk package I think slots really nicely into this deck because Korg and Rockslide give us a way to be at least a little bit disruptive while also being proactive with all of our plays to consistently enable Thena every single turn. This deck list is definitely on the less accessible side for Marvel Snap overall. I would go so far as to say Thena, Kitty Pryde, Hope Summer, Ravonna, and obviously Darkhawk are all must-have Series 4 and 5 cards for it to operate at close to efficiency. Nocturne you can substitute out for something like Jeff or Nightcrawler, and Sage can swap for something like Wolfsbane, as they are lesser core parts to what the deck is trying to do. Our next top performing deck list is a really interesting amalgamation of Darkhawk and Silver Surfer, with a lot of overlapping cards in these packages working well together. Absorbing Man, for instance, works really cleanly with not only Brood and Silver Surfer, but also allowing you to double up Rockslide as well. Sarah at the top end of the curve in this deck list lets us play 3 energy cards in the last turn of the game, but she also allows us to play Darkhawk as well as Mystique to allow us to pop up 2 massive stat sticks against something like Airshim at the last moment before they have the chance to interact with either. This deck list is conveniently a little bit more on the accessible side, with Darkhawk, I would say, being the only must-have higher series card for it. Nocturne and Mockingbird can easily be substituted out for other 3 energy cards of your choosing that provides your utility depending on what you're looking to be. Finally, we close things out with a Miles Morales stature Darkhawk variation that was a high potential list last week that's picked up in popularity a good deal and is still punching well above its weight class. I used this deck list to secure one of my Infinite Conquest wins last season, and it really feels like it has good tools to answer most things in the format. Your proactive disruption that Darkhawk provides, as well as Miles and stature giving you additional stat sticks, pairs really cleanly with reactive answers like Shang-Chi and Enchantress on the final turn of the game to keep up with whatever your opponents are throwing your way. As far as higher series cards go in this deck list, Darkhawk is obviously must have, and then I would say you probably need 2 of the 3 Jeff, Silk, and Nocturne to have enough appropriate move enablers for Miles, with the ability to replace one of whichever you're missing with Nightcrawler to serve a similar role. White Widow is definitely the easiest to replace in the list, and you could substitute her out cleanly for your favorite other 2 energy cards, such as Lizard or Medusa. All in all, I gotta say I'm absolutely loving this metagame. While Arisham's play rate is definitely still a little bit on the high side, its power level does not feel remotely concerning to me as someone who's been playing a lot of different decks into it. Gwenpool is a fun and exciting addition to the game that even has me playing cards like Okoye and Nakia that I had never touched before and feeling happy and good about doing so. I would love to hear which decks you're finding success with in the comments down below. And remember, if you want to check out me playing with a bunch of these decks, in the video description, there is a link to my secondary daily deck highlights channel where I'll be doing exactly that. As always, if you enjoyed my roundup, snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel to not miss any of my Marvel Snap content here many days of the week.